Hi, welcome everyone to this panel discussion on reinventing contracts. And I have three of who I on this topic of reinventing contracts. I have Mr. Patrick Andrews, who has been an attorney at law, we call it attorney at law in Trinidad and Tobago, but it's a barrister, solicitor for over 30 years here in the UK. And I will let him more deeply introduce himself because he actually calls himself a barefoot lawyer. And he has been really pivotal in leading on how we can arrange and organize ourselves and take decisions within corporate structures in a more conscious way. And it's very fascinating, the work that Patrick has been doing, and has a lot to contribute on this issue. We also have Miss Sarah Fox, also a lawyer here in the UK, who is pioneering a new way of simplifying contracts. And in fact, she had created something that really took off for, called 500-word contracts. And what it was is that Sarah is able to combine her background in math and law, and she is able to really simplify complex ideas, and has been doing a lot of work on how do we create more collaborative and trust-based contracts. And we have Miss Rhiannon Thomas, also a lawyer here in the UK, but with a practice that spans across EU and South Africa, and has been one of the pioneering voices and thought leaders in the field of integrative law, and is doing some incredible work on reimagining marriage contracts in particular, and wills, and these kinds of documents. So I think we have a really rich discussion planned for those of you tuning in now and those of you who will be watching us on the replay. So welcome, guys. And I was thinking we could just start this by each of you introducing yourself and saying, how you came to begin the work of rethinking the way we make agreements with each other within your own sphere. So I know everyone, we should say the women go first, but I would like Patrick. I'd like to ask Patrick to go first.
Unmute myself. Thanks, Margaret Rose. Where do I start? I was noting the other day that I'm on Myers-Briggs, I'm intuitive introvert, which means I understand things and can't explain them. So I'll give it my best shot. I suppose my journey was starting off, over 30 years ago in a law firm in London, doing sort of mixture of litigation, just general commercial work. And just have this feeling in my body, I suppose, that it was all terribly abstract. And I struggled with that. And some people are very comfortable in that space of abstraction, but sitting in a dry office with dry paper just felt like too disconnected from life. And I shifted fairly soon afterwards into being an in-house lawyer. So I worked employed by large companies around the world. And what I found was that if I didn't have a contract that couldn't be read by engineers and marketing people and finance people, it was of no use. I could do the most perfect contract, but it would be just like this, a beautiful cake that no one eats. I'm thinking of cakes because I know Sarah bakes cakes. So I quickly found that it was better to have no matter how much money was involved, better to have a 5-page contract that someone would read than a beautiful 40-page contract that no one read. And the thing is that I think law firms are still trying to understand this. And of course, the incentives are wrong in law firms because they're worried about being sued. They all hark back to the days of when you were paid by the word. So I've got to the stage after different journeys so I worked in-house for years and really liked working in-house in engineering companies and retail. I'll be brief because there's 3 of us. I got out about 20 years ago because of worries about climate change and the ecological crisis, realizing that big companies could do so much more and just weren't doing it for various reasons. And I got really interested in the relationships. I'm a relationship lawyer primarily. The relationships between shareholders, the management, the staff in a company, and how we arrange that in these sort of Newtonian ways rather than recognizing our humanity. So I'm on a mission, I suppose, and have been for many years to heal relationships. So I'm really inspired by lawyers, this idea of a lawyer as healer, of healing our fragmented society. And contracts is one way I manifest that, and also helping people who want to set up a business that does good rather than just slavishly try to serve shareholders. And there's no legal structure for that. We have to cobble together these feudal structures that we've inherited. So I try and help people work differently. So there's both. So that's two aspects of my practice. And I've actually given up I'm not on the role of solicitors because I have more freedom that way. And being registered doesn't add value to my clients. So that's me in brief. And I suppose I've, in a way, just to conclude, I mean, I love trees. That's a big part of who I am, is loving nature and trees in particular. And I live in a forest. So for years I was struggling with this question of what does a lawyer who loves trees do? And I think my practice now is a constant experiment and exploration of what that is. That's me.
Thank you, Patrick. Sarah?
Do you know what, that's really fascinating, because that's reminded me of two things I think actually have subconsciously influenced me. So I started off as a maths graduate, then went into law, ended up in construction law by accident. And then also I'm a dual qualified lawyer trainer. I'm also not on the roll of solicitors. But actually I was training people on construction contracts, what they meant, what they could do with them, what they actually meant. And when I asked them, has any of you read these contracts? They'd all kind of look at their feet and whistle and look a little bit embarrassed. And actually, what Patrick's just said about cakes is really important, because you did a lot of cake sculpting. And the very first cake I made for somebody at work, which was a book and a mug to represent the football team, he refused to cut it because he didn't have a way of taking a photo. You know, this is before we all had smartphones. And I was furious, because there's no point having a cake which you don't eat. In the same way, there's no point having a contract that you don't use. It's a waste of all that beautiful effort and energy and enthusiasm and time and cost and money and paper. So the other thing that Patrick was saying was about trees, was I remember doing a quiz as a newly qualified lawyer. And in fact, I won the quiz. It was kind of based on Who Wants to Be a Millionaire. And they gave me the money. I said, I won't take the money, but I'll donate it to the Woodland Trust for all the trees that are cut down to make contracts which nobody ever reads. And when Patrick said that, I'd forgotten that for ages. And actually, you know, I kind of got to the point where I thought, I'm going to workshops to train people on contracts they don't read, they don't care about, they can't use. Why am I doing this? So I developed this, as you said, a 500-word training tool. And originally it was to try and get them to debate some of the big picture issues, time, cost, risk, process. And then people on the course said, actually, I quite like this idea, because it encapsulates everything we really need without getting too, you know, too detailed, without getting into legal issues that we don't really understand. It's a 5-page contract that Patrick was talking about. Better to have a 5-page contract that you do read and changes your behaviour than a 40 or 400-page contract which nobody pays any attention to. So I kind of developed this training tool, and that led me down a series of rabbit holes, I suppose, looking at trust-based contracting, because one of the first things I did was to create a contract that had columns for each party. And when the columns got disproportionate length, you realise that the obligations were disproportionately weighed on one side rather than the other. And then contract simplification obviously was critical to getting a standard construction contract in the UK, somewhere between 15 and 50,000 words. So quite a lot of simplification involved, but also digital, conscious contracting, all sorts of using contracts to build proper relationships rather than just as a sticking plaster when things are going wrong. So that's how I ended up sort of creating this idea of 500 words, not because I think 500 is, you know, perfect length, but just because I think it starts to get people to focus on what really matters, and the key information that's different. So if it's in there and it doesn't change behavior, then it doesn't really do any good. So that's kind of me in a nutshell. Not 500 words, I have to say. Sorry, Rhiannon.
That was great. I'm going to come back to you on a couple of the things that you said for sure. Rhiannon?
Hi, thanks, Margaret. Thanks for having me here. So, just listening to Patrick and Sarah, there are so many common threads, I think, between the three of us, and I think I've picked up a few which I've written down here. And yes, I love trees too. That's why my law firm, it's not a law firm because I'm not actually allowed to work collectively when I'm registered. So it's a consultancy. It's called Milkwood Law, which is after a tree that the milkwood, which grows in South Africa, and there's some species there that are over 1,000 years old, and it's known as the tree of wholeness. And for me, that was really an important symbol in my practice because I want to practice a holistic, kind of law that recognizes nature as well as humans and the things we need to do. But the common threads I thought that we had are this disillusionment with what the law, what we were doing in the law and how it wasn't able to really help the people who were using it. And I think that's the common thread between us all is that we are interested in relationships and law working for the people who are using it. And so my background is that I started off in a conventional law firm and then started my own practice because I felt disillusioned with the way practice was being done in the firm that I worked in. But I started with a very conventional practice myself. The only unconventional thing about it was me. But it still felt like it was lacking, like the processes were lacking. And the kinds of law that I practiced meant that people came to see me about sort of life stage events. So when they were getting married, or when they were thinking about their death and they wanted to draft a will, or when someone had died and they wanted me to administer their estate. And so in those conversations, I realized or felt that there was this whole part missing, which was the emotional part. And my training, I was lucky in that I've worked as a trauma counselor and various things. So I had some of my own training to work with emotive issues, but no formal training. And especially around the marriage contracts. So in South Africa, most middle-class people will have a marriage contract because the default matrimonial property system that regulates marriages in South Africa is in community of property. So that is you from the, all debts and all assets become shared 50-50 from the day you were born with the person that you marry. And that's quite a radical thing, yeah. So people generally contract out of that if they have any assets. And so we would start talking about finances and how these were going to work in the relationship and at the end of the relationship. And people just couldn't have a conversation where they could really, in a meaningful way, engage with anything other than the wedding, really. And so it felt like, but this was a perfect opportunity for these people to think a bit more deeply about what they were going into and their relationship. And so I approached a clinical psychologist who worked with couples and said to her, why don't we develop a process together and create a holistic process where we look at the legal document, but we also look at the relationship. And so that sort of drove me towards looking at relational contracts and user-focused contracts. And then I met Kim Wright, who told me all about the integrative law movement. And there's a common thread. She knows all the three of us as well, so she's a common thread. And then introduced me to the concept of conscious contracting, which I had already been doing sort of myself in my own way. So it was so wonderfully affirming to know that there were other people who felt the same as me. And so my practice is it revolves around creating user-focused contracts for people who want to be in relationship, and also around providing a holistic service to people who want to draft a will and any other end-of-life documents in a supportive and contained yeah, sort of in a supportive and compassionate way. So that's me.
Thanks, Rhiannon, for that. What strikes me about what each of you said was the connection, one of them being the tree. And you all referred to this connection with a tree, with forests. And I started thinking about what a tree is, and an image of a tree. And, you know, there are many different types of trees, and some trees are actually quite complex and far-reaching and intertwined, and lots of leaves and branches all over. So one of the things that popped up for me is that, yes, we want to simplify, but are we trying to simplify things that really ought not to be simplified, because they are so complex in their nature, and there's so many moving parts that we have to be prepared for all the moving parts. So I want to take it back to you, Sarah, and then Patrick on this, because both of you are working in the corporate field, and Sarah with construction contracts that are so, yes, they're FIDIC contract, hundreds of pages for sure, but I guess with the vast majority of construction claims, we don't really use most of the provisions. However, with the biggest construction claims, those contracts are very much in use. All the clauses. So at least that's my perspective on it. How do you address that? Can this approach that you have be applied to the biggest disputes, the biggest types of contracts that have some of the most complex issues arising? Mute.
Mute.
Yes, I thought I'd pressed it.
Is that yes? Is that yes?
Well, I think the reality is that a lot of the technical information about a construction project is very complicated, but the construction contract isn't telling you what you're building. It's telling you about the relationship during the phase of building it, okay, and what your obligations are. And the reality is that the vast majority of project claims are about the quality of the finished project, and that's almost all set in the technical information, because yes, there'll be issues to do with friction over payment and processes, and there's an awful lot of stuff coming out of the pandemic to do with change management.
Yeah.
But actually, the reality is that during the pandemic, lots of people took out their very long, complicated contracts and went in them and flicked through them and tried to find that there was an answer to this situation, and none of them had anything to do with this issue. Now, the reality of that in traditional legal practice is now people are just lumping new stuff in to try and fill the hole, but we can't keep trying to fill holes. That's not how contracts should be working. They should be about building really good relationships, and the people who've come out of the pandemic on the sort of projects that I get involved in best are the ones who had a good working relationship, good communication skills, and simple processes that didn't try and define to the nth degree what the future was, but said, we're in a project that could take 20 years or 5 years or 5 months to finish. We need flexibility. We need to be able to talk to one another, share information. You need to get a fair price. I need to get what I want out of it. We're going to try and talk that through continually. And rather than trying to set it in stone like Moses in his 10 commandments, we're going to say, these are the ground rules of how we want to work together. This is what we're trying to achieve. But we know that even that, the time, the cost, the quality, the specification might need to move. And actually, that's exactly what's happened on some big projects where they're looking at building offices that nobody wants anymore. What if they'd had a more intuitive, a more flexible contract that said, we'd like to build a building, we're going to start off with offices, but actually we might need to change it into something fundamentally different. We might need to change it into home working spaces that people can rent by the hour or something. We might need, because we can't see what the future holds. And actually the idea that we should be able to set it in stone and that would work for any period of time is just madness in the current climate. And there's always been madness, but it's been sort of past practice. So There have been loads of cases, Margaret, that basically have said, yes, it's a really complicated thing, but actually the contracts haven't helped. All that detail has added layers of complexity, multiple authorship, ambiguities, inconsistencies, because nobody reads the whole thing. So actually, although people feel comforted often by big contracts, the reality is that if they had a really short contract that they could actually properly interrogate and read and understand, they would have a better working relationship going forward.
A lot you said there that I'm reflecting on. So, yeah. So first of all, let me just pick up on one thing. There would be a force majeure clause in to cover situations like this, and this has been addressed, you know, since the pandemic. So, would a trust-based contract? Yeah, I'm seeing, because I do want to push back a little. I love what you're doing in the world and what you're trying to do in the world. I'm just trying to articulate another position. So there are force majeure contracts that are in these complex or complicated, I would say, contracts with all these layers of complexity. And one would think if we were to throw that out the door, you know, what are we putting in its place? That's one. And two, I love what you're saying about the agility and innovation that we want to bring into the relational contract space. However, you do put parties, and particularly if a buyer had the ability to say, yeah, this is what I want, and I'm hiring you on the basis that this is what you want, what I want, but that could change. I mean, that is a huge risk for the supplier. So to me, in order for what you're saying to work, it has to start with trust, right? Because if there's no trust between the parties, the process that you're advocating for, I don't really think could work. So in what you're doing, how do you build that in? And is it correct that we have to start with trust and that sort of thing?
Well, the idea that a piece of paper could build trust rather than break trust, and that is a replacement for trust, is kind of like it's just wrong. You know, if you don't trust someone, why would you go into business with them when there's millions of pounds at stake, thousands of man and person hours at stake? Why would you put your energy into something where you fundamentally are a little hesitant to get involved? You know, it's I was talking on Saturday and I said, you know, I'm on a tandem, we have to trust each other. You know, it was hard at the beginning because he had all the control, he had all the information, he had, you know, total control over my destiny. But, you know, if I got on the back and just thought I don't trust him, you know, how would that have worked? It couldn't. You know, I can't go in a different direction. So I think contracts shouldn't be a replacement for trust. I think they should actually be built on trust. And if we don't trust each other, then no contract in the world is going to be useful. So, you know, yeah, frankly, if we don't trust each other, let's just walk away now. I think the clauses that we've had to do with force majeure haven't defined it well, haven't explained the consequences well, and haven't reflected what has happened in this current lockdown. So actually, force majeure of itself isn't the answer. A good change management principle is the answer. I think you're right that by saying, actually, if we want to pivot completely, then that's very different from what we contracted for. We might want to say, well, let's stop this contract and start another one. But because we've built a good relationship, we will. So we do need sensible processes that don't say, by the way, I thought I wanted you to build me a house, now I want you to build me an aircraft hangar. That's obviously not the right way to move. That's sort of total flexibility for the client and ties the contractor into something that they don't want to do, like a marriage contract that said, by the way, I can substitute my brother if I change my mind halfway through. That's not really what we're expecting, and that wouldn't be how we could use a contract and keep trust. But I think we kind of need to say that the problem with over monitoring, over specifying processes and defining force majeure to the last act of God and all this kind of stuff is, it means that we're not flexible enough when things happen that haven't happened before, that we can't innovate, that we don't allow people to say, do you know what, I don't think this is going to work at the moment. Let's take a step back rather than trying to find the answers in the paperwork.
I hear you. Thank you, Sarah. I want to bring Patrick in on this because Sarah is really strong on this point, that a contract should not replace trust. But wouldn't you say that the way we've been contracting, contracts have been a mechanism for establishing trust between parties? And if we are to move to the position that we must trust each other in order to contract with each other and have an agreement with each other outside of a contract, the law that we've agreed to guide our relationship between us, I don't know how many contracts we will have in the world. What are your reflections on that?
Yeah, this is really making me think, and I really like what Sarah said. I suppose one of the things is that I think I tend to agree with Sarah that I think even almost by its own terms, the current system isn't working, except for the law firms who can justify £20,000. And even they, most lawyers I know, don't go into it because they deliberately want to screw clients out of money just to get paid for doing useless contracts that are too long. They really don't. But they don't. The measures they use are how much money have I made this year. And they also, for the most part, the lawyers have never worked in a situation where they've actually had to see the outcome of their contracts. I remember working with a brilliant lawyer who was head of Freshfields in Frankfurt, really bright guy. And he talked about a commercial lawyer, very experienced, and he talked about that day when one of his contracts ended up in court and how this beautifully constructed contract was just torn to shreds by a good litigating law. And that would be the case for every single law, because the longer the contract. And actually, so it doesn't even work in those terms that you can't, you know, and I do think that I don't advocate using sort of conscious or short contracts for everybody, because I think there is a certain level of, some people just have to learn that their way of seeing the world with there's the enemy and I'm the good guy doesn't work. And sometimes they have to spend, you know, waste energy and waste time and bang their heads against a brick wall and cause violence to themselves and others to learn that. I think that what I've seen is that, and to come back to, are these contracts able to deal with complexity? I mean, there ain't much more complex than, you know, a marriage in terms of relationships and what can happen. You sign up to something and suddenly you're having kids or who are maybe sick, or that your partner gets sick, or you get sick, or you lose your work, and you know, all sorts of things can happen in those, and you've got to navigate that. And any contract in the world is not going to help you find the emotional, mental, spiritual, you know, capacity to be able to deal with that. So I think very often the contracts I produce, very often I think they're just, the ideal is that they're never really used again, except as a reference. It's the process. I really emphasize, go through this process and you will get more capable of contracting consciously. You'll be more aware of what you're letting yourself in for, because I've helped you think through. And even I've gone beyond that actually in my practice now, partly the barefoot lawyer thing. The barefoot lawyer thing is partly about, it's not just emotion, but it's about connecting with the bodily of feeling. Because this stuff, the mind, you know, a good lawyer can argue black is white and white is black and convince themselves actually. The body has a completely different way of knowing, and we completely exclude that as having any validity in a court, in a contract. And so more and more I think, so I do a shareholders agreement with somebody and I say, all right, before we even look at a piece of paper, a single word, stand here, you're a single person running a business. You're contracting with this person. It's like a marriage. So stand in the room and feel what it feels like to be on your own with customers and suppliers and so on. For and then now, your colleague Joe, come and stand with your back to Paula. How does that change things in your body? Don't think about it, just what does it feel like? Oh, someone's got my back. Okay, but then turn around and face each other. You've now got a relationship to manage, so it's changed. So it's not, you're changing something. So on the one hand, someone's got your back, you're in it together. On the other hand, you've got a relationship with that falls apart. So you've got to pay attention to both those things. And then I get a third person to come in. How does that feel? And they'll spend at least an hour and a half on their feet exploring. What if someone wants to go a bit further away? They want to go part-time. How does that feel? Once they've actually felt it in their bodies, what's happening, the contract writes itself. The contract emerges from their knowing. They know this because the body just finds this. You know, the body can deal with death, giving birth. Well, not in my case, but you know, for half the population, all sorts of amazing things which the mind would just completely freak out at. You know, losing a limb. Your mind cannot cope with that. It just explodes, right? And that's better actually what the mind does. The body shuts down the mind. Look, you can't deal with this. So trauma, shut down the mind, it just can't cope, but the heart knows how to deal with all sorts of things. So a lot of our problems with our approach is that we really think, I'll give you a metaphor, and I could go on with that for hours, but also I'm very stimulated by the subject. So I worked in an aircraft engine company, okay? So I've learned how to dismantle an aircraft engine. And every now and then, predictably, in the air, one of these engines will go pop and just stop running, okay? But it's a twin engine, it's not at the end of the world. One engine's enough to get you to the next airport, okay? And an engineer said, you know what? We could design an engine that would never go pop. It would just run and run and run and run and run. The problem is, the current engines cost £500,000 each and they weigh half a ton. The perfect engine would weigh 5 tons, it would cost £10 million and no one would buy it and it would never get off the ground. What I've noticed is law firms kid themselves the large part that they can build the perfect contract. It will predict everything. And if they think of something, and I've seen this, I mean, I don't know about you, but I've been in negotiations where the lawyer is given an extra day and they think of, well, here's something else that could go wrong. Oh my God, so let's produce 5 pages of stuff. And then because of fear, actually, rather than saying, yes, but you can only think, your mind cannot possibly imagine all the different scenarios that could happen. So give up the quest for the perfect contract. Instead, and it's a laziness and it's a lack of understanding, it's a lack of bodily awareness of what's really going on. What are the dynamics? Because the thing they were talking about was a 0.001%, but they still wanted to charge $5,000 for the privilege of them having thought about it and produce some useless words. If they were in-house, they wouldn't give themselves that luxury. I was in-house, I said, I'm making a decision, strike it out. We're not doing that. Because all they're doing is trying to decrease uncertainty. And there's a certain point you do that and you increase risk. And the lawyers don't get that because you increase risk by you alienate your client, you alienate the other side, you spin out the negotiations, they take even longer. So you basically undermine the whole bloody thing. And a lot of the lawyers just didn't get this until they're 50 and they're so comfortable and fat sitting in a law firm that they can't change the system anymore. So they either get out or they just leave the little ones to learn this stuff. Or they never get it at all because they never have to. Yeah, anyway, so, I won't go on anymore.
That was great. And I think what really spoke to me as you were sharing there is this embodied approach you are trying to bring into the contracting space. And really and truly, you are saying, at least this is what I'm getting, is that traditional contracting is actually based on it's a quest based on fear, right? And that the contract has been, you know, tying back to what Sarah was saying, the mechanism that we use to deal with that fear, to try to create trust, but you have a more embodied approach with your clients. I do want to bring Rhiannon in though.
Just one more thing, and that fear is connected to an excessive faith in the mind.
Got it.
And not an insufficient, which is related to the masculine, an insufficient faith in the strange language of the body and the heart, which is associated with the feminine. So
right. Yeah. So wait, but before I go to you, because I'm like, I really resonate deeply with this. The question is, people coming to you will not be where you are at in terms of understanding these things. And so you are saying that you take people through a process by the end of which they realize, okay, I can trust myself in this situation with this other, and I can negotiate with this other on that basis. And then you help put something together for them.
And you have to judge your client. And some would find that completely, so some clients, a whole lot of clients I just exclude, I don't work for them, they're not attracted to me and I'm not attracted to them. And then there's some who just completely get it without question. And there's some in the middle you navigate and maybe you use slightly more traditional language. So you have to adjust your approach to what your client's ready for. But there is an education process for, and actually I'm educated too. If I don't engage myself in the process of education about, then I'm not doing my job either. I can't be the distant expert. I have to be part of the growing process, the learning. We're all learning together.
Right. So lawyer as healer is also lawyer as educator, as coach, as facilitator of personal transformation. That's what I'm hearing from you.
As co-creator, yeah.
Yeah, as co-creator of transformation. So Rhiannon, I mean, does this ring true? I think it would, be even more relevant outside of the commercial sphere into the sphere that you are dealing with your types of marriage contracts and end of life.
So I do disagree slightly with Sarah in that I do think that contracts can build trust. But I don't know if it's the contract so much as what you've just pointed out as the process involved in developing the contract. So for me, I do see people. So for example, I've been working on a project with some lawyers in Basque country called RTL, developing lease agreements between landlords and refugee tenants. So there's a lot of prejudice involved and a lot of fear. It's fear-based, but it's sort of suspicion of between these landlords and these refugee tenants. And so they want to enter into an agreement because they want to provide a place for these people to live. But at the outset, if they were if they were just handed a lease agreement, all that would do is it might provide some safety. They might think it provided a sense of safety. But in my view, when you put a contract down like that, it might be safe because the contract has developed ways to deal with all the possibilities that could go wrong. But it's a false sense of safety because, as Sarah said and as Patrick said, if there's what you need is trust. The safety without trust just falls apart because you need to trust that the person's going to do what they've said they're going to do. So in my view, I think that certainly around contracts, and maybe it is because I work more with contracts between individuals than with corporates or big ventures. But in my sort of experience is that often there is not, people are at the beginning of something that they're doing together. Even with the marriage contracts, I mean, they're at the beginning of the marriage, so and trust is something that is built up over years and years, and it's very easy to get rid of it very quickly, and then it takes years and years to get back. So my view is that if you create a process with the clients that really looks at the relationship, and rather than just looking at a contract which should protect you against these uncertain future events, then you build trust. Whereas, and in fact, in my experience as well, is where someone is just given a contract, that breaks down trust because they feel as if there's something in that contract that's going to be, that they don't understand it, first of all. So when you don't understand something, you become suspicious of it. And there's this contract in legalese, and it's like, well, why do we need this? Because if we're going to be okay and we trust each other, why do we need this document that says all these things we don't understand? So I think it's a very complex thing, like a tree. But I think that there is a way of building trust using the process. And for me, that's the difference between the way we do contracts, all three of us, and other lawyers, is that other lawyers, their process is, okay, tell me what you need. Okay, you need a framework services agreement. This is our standard one. Just tell me a little bit about your business and I'll tweak these few clauses and off you go. that's, you know, each contract that I'm sure Sarah creates and that Patrick creates, obviously they have similarities to the other contract, but each one is particularly unique to the parties. And that's what Patrick was saying about lawyers sort of being, we tend often to be a bit lazy in that they will just use precedents again and again, and then it doesn't serve the client. So,
yeah, thanks for that, Rhiannon. I'll give Sarah and Patrick an opportunity to respond to what you said.
So yeah, I think Rhiannon's right in the sense that if you just, it would be like if you were going on a first date and, you know, somebody pops to the toilet and comes back with a massive long, you know, contract and says, we're getting on well, let's just see how it goes, but this is how we'll break up in 5 years' time if that happens. That's pretty much how it happens with a lot of contracts. They haven't even got to the point of building a decent relationship, and particularly in corporates where you have so many different people who are interested in the layers of this contract, building trust across all those different divisions, departments, roles, responsibilities in a corporate is really difficult to do. But I think sometimes a contract is produced as a fait accompli, going ta-da! And actually my research shows that nobody gives a fig about the contracts. They're only interested in what the project will produce at the end of it. So actually the contract becomes a massive barrier to building that relationship properly, because they don't take the time to do what Rhiannon said and Andrew said. They didn't know what Patrick said. They don't take the time to get to know each other, to kind of create a celebration, have a party. This is the beginning of a beautiful relationship. It's more like, this is how we're going to throw you off the cliff at the end of it, rather, and which it's just really kind of the wrong thing. But, you know, going back to your analogy, Margaret, Rose, about trees, a really mature tree takes a long time to create. We start with a tiny little seed or a nut or whatever.
Sure.
But even as it grows, in order to keep it a healthy tree, we need to give it lots of light and food and space and not trample over its roots, and we need to prune it, and we need to, so we don't, even though it's complex, we can prune even the biggest tree down to the bare minimum that we need, the shape that would make it lovely and healthy and everything else. And that's kind of what I do with contracts, is take a beautiful complex thing and just prune it back so that we can see it in all its glory, so it can be a healthier representation of the relationship, rather than trying to hope that by itself it will know exactly what to do and to deal with everything that comes in. So yeah, I think it's really interesting that contracts sort of should be a way of recording a good relationship rather than damaging an already slightly dodgy one.
Okay. I feel.
add one thing.
Yeah.
The sort of mantra for many contract lawyers is more is better. And I had that exact experience this morning chatting to a solicitor, or attorney as we call ourselves in South Africa. And I was saying to her, it can't work. You're going to have to deal with this in the contract and explain to them that what they're trying to do actually cannot work in law. And she was like, do you think I should write another contract to attach to that one for that part? And I was like, no, don't write another contract. Just put it in that contract. And that was her initial thing, is, okay, we need another contract for this, you know, and so it's the mindset as well that really needs to shift. And I think that is so important, is this mindset shift that's required for anyone who wants to. So it's more than just it's more. It's like Patrick saying, it's like an embodiment.
Yeah.
What's needed.
Yeah. I'm loving this. And suppose I were to say now, I am convinced, yes, we need this more embodied, and I'm already there, guys. So I'm just playing, but I'm saying, I think I'm convinced by what the three of you have said about this. And we've been talking at this level of, come on, we need to simplify contracts. We need to have more of a process, relational approach to building contracts. And, you know, we need to take people through that process. And I'm convinced. What does that look like now? This new type of contract that we're talking about, what does that look like? And you know, any of you can jump in on this. I'm saying, have you, in your doing this and creating this shift, have you found that there are certain key components that every contract tends to need to have? even in its most simplified form? And what would those be? Anyone could?
Well, I can answer that one just from the point of sort of perspective of conscious contracting, is that there are certain, and there've been some, other discussions during the summit around that. But so yes, I think there are certain things that have to be included in order for this kind of contract to work. And coming from the paradigm of conscious contracting, those things are a touchstone, which is touchstone, which is the kind of guiding North Star for the relationship. So how do we, what is our vision? What do we want to do together? And most importantly, what are the values that we want to bring into this relationship? So that those, because those stand, they're almost like, they're actually, if we use the example of a tree, they're the mycelium under the forest floor. They're the things that inform everything about the tree coming up. So every time the tree needs to make a decision about whether to grow this way or grow that way, it consults with what's going on underneath, the values or the vision, and then looks at that and says, well, my vision is to be a very tall tree, so I'm going to grow up rather than out. So that's what the touchstone is. And then the other thing that conscious contracting says is imperative in a relational contract is a process through which the parties can address change and engage disagreement. Because in a relationship, conflict is an inevitable part and change is inevitable. So we know those two things for certain. So if we can come up with a process by which we're going to deal with those at the outset, then things are still going really well between us, and it provides a system, then that system prevails going into the future, and we can tweak it as it goes along. And then the sort of third thing is that the contract is seen as a living document, as seen as something that isn't put in the drawer. So it's used to, and it's adjusted and reviewed as the relationship develops. So there's generally built into those contracts some kind of review process. It might be quarterly, it might be every 6 months or only annually, but that's built in as well.
That's incredible, Rhiannon, because I think that kind of contract can certainly contribute to a lot less disputes coming before the court. Sarah and Patrick, do you want to add anything that you would think would be the core of a contract? Or?
Well, one of the things I try and do is to get people to think about the fuzzy edges and the assumptions that they've made in a project about who's doing what, because quite often people are very good at saying what they're doing, and then there's all the grey stuff around the edge that people who might think they're doing, might not think they're doing, they're not actually being clear about. And I think quite a lot of the fuzzy edges actually cause the expectations to be wrong at the beginning, because they haven't talked about it enough. They've kind of probably done a bit of an off-the-shelf job. It's like, oh, we've done this sort of thing before, it's just this package A or package B or package C. But one of the things I always do when I write a set of contracts is to look at the values and the vision of the business as they say on their website, and I weave it in. And if they ask me to take it out, I kind of, then obviously the question is, well, do you live by your values? Because if you've got them on your website and you tell everyone this is really important to you, but you want me to take it out of your contracts, there's something not quite right going on. Wow. So I'm with Rhiannon. I think there's a lot of stuff to do with how you manage change, how you manage disputes. And, I think there's too much emphasis on legal enforcement and not enough on self-management of this process. But fundamentally, a contract should be a tool to help you do this project collaboratively together in trust and everything else, rather than look at what happens when it goes wrong, which is a lot of the focus of the traditional legal contracts.
was my next question. I'll just throw it out. I'll throw out that question then. Patrick, did you want to add anything on what is essential?
I mean, what's coming to me, I certainly agree that what I found very helpful, this in general, this framing of, you start from the the shared objective, the shared vision. You try and see if the values are aligned. What are your shared values in relation to this? Because that does unearths assumptions. In a way, sometimes I see this as about there's a tuning in. Here's two separate people who may never, or organizations may never been in contact with each other, and how do you align each other sufficiently? And tuning is a nice metaphor for it. You're tuning in, you're making noises, like you're like a bat, sending stuff up, and what's the quality of sound that comes back because you say something. And if you and typically, the lawyers aren't taught to help their clients have those conversations. So I think that vision, I often have a mental checklist of something like purpose and values, and then when inevitably conflict happens, how do we deal with that? I have that checklist. I suppose at the same time, at the risk of being maybe contradictory, is that I don't think it's about the contract. I think there's a danger of somebody once talked about, you point at the moon and they said, look at that. And they go, oh yeah, that's it. No, look at that. And they go, oh yeah, that's really interesting. You look at the finger, not at the moon. The contract is the finger. The moon is the relationships. And about, so the danger of focusing too much on any particular type of contract, because the best contract may be one that actually you just agree over the handshake. And most actually contracting is done without paper and without lawyers. And this is my humbling experience in a big company, is that, 99.99% of the contracts done in the company I never saw. So I would just be very grateful when I saw any and was able to contribute to them. Because we're always contracting. I contract with my wife to say, yes, I'll take out the rubbish and you wash the sheets. So, there's a danger that we get very technocratic and say, right, this contract has to be reviewed every 6 months. And that could drive you bloody bonkers, actually. I think the principle is lovely, but the relationship should, of course, be alive. Whether it needs to be written down, you need to go through that process every time. I don't know. I've seen that theory, and people have put it in contracts, and it's much more ignored than it is observed, even in very healthy contracts. So I think for me, it's as simple and as complex as how do people relate together? And that is like, when you've solved that, well, you will make Jeff Bezos look like a very poor man because you'll have solved life. What happens when two human beings or two organizations come together? What does trust even mean in that context? What does that happen? And what does trust? Maybe you completely trust each other and then actually you learn later not to trust, and that's fine. It's a different sort of trust, and then it becomes deeper. So I think there's a contract. We only, being very humble, we only get to intervene as a very limited amount of time, and the relationship may go on for 20 years, and the lawyers may only come in for 6 months or 1 month or 2 days. So let's not pretend that the contract is anything more than a very, so I don't know what I'm saying now, but I think for me, the fundamental principle is I'm trying to feel what's really important here, and how can I help them to see that? And then, because the more that erases into their awareness, rather than just being buried in there somewhere, they know it. So my assumption is, what's important here. You just haven't surfaced it. It's subconscious. So all my work is about helping them to try and ascertain what's really important. And then they'll immediately see maybe we don't have a contract at all because there isn't any trust. So maybe we don't want a contract, and that's really useful too. So I think there's something about trying to think there's a perfect contract for every situation or a perfect process. I haven't seen that. I just try and say the test is what works, and that might take 50 years to decide whether it's the right contract. So I don't pretend to have solved it.
You know what is so powerful about what you're saying is, and as I reflect on what each of you are saying, it's really hitting home to me how much the contract tradition is actually a symptom of the illness, the dysfunction that we have in society. And I mean, you really just brought it all together in your last contribution, Patrick, because you said we are contracting all the time, right? You know, with our family members, with people in the community, people on the phone. Between us, we've been contracting very easily. And I'm feeling goosebumps as I'm saying this. But when is it that we feel that we must have that piece of paper? And it's when money is involved in this society, right? It's when there is money involved, when we move into that realm of our market-driven society and who owns what and who is going to be able to use what and who is going to gain the profit from what, that we then have to, we feel compelled to turn to this piece of paper as the mechanism. So, you know, this is really fascinating because in future law, we are talking about empirically responsible legal system change. And we don't use those words because they sound nice together. We're saying empirically responsible because as the science is showing us, it's what those of us who are spiritual always knew, that we are interconnected and interdependent. The science is now showing us that we are interconnected and interdependent. And therefore, we feel that there is an impetus right now for us to really have a push for empirically responsible legal system change, because we have contracts, as you all are seeing here. We have a contracting system that is based on a non-empirical understanding of who we are as human beings, as being separate, right-seeking, competitive, aggressive, not pro-social, not pro-belonging, not compassionate, not empathetic. And so this is what you all are doing. I mean, I always felt so, but just this conversation has enriched me even more, guys, because I think what you are doing in the world is so revolutionary. You know, how can we get this more mainstream? How can we do that, guys? Tell me. Yes, Rhiannon?
Oh, no, I just wanted to say, I think you've really hit on something. And I'm just thinking about, you know, I think, I don't know where this information is. You can find this information, how many lawyers there are in the world.
Right.
And there are more lawyers in America than in the rest of the world put together.
Wow.
According to the numbers. And there are very, very few lawyers in a country like Japan, which does a huge amount of commercial contracting. You know, I mean, they're one of the big producers of all these brands that we know.
Right.
And to me, I think a lot of it is because we were talking about trust, but maybe what's changed in society and maybe what is going to come, hopefully reinvigorate in the new normal, is the concept of honor, of actually honoring your obligations and doing what you say you're going to do. Instead of the adversarial approach, which is I'm going to try and get, I'm going to try and get one over you. I'm going to try and enrich the greed. You know, I'm going to try and enrich myself at the expense of the rest of the world. I mean, look at colonialism. That's basically what it was, enriching the British Empire at the expense of all the colonies. So, and for me, I'm thinking like America, all those lawyers, because there's not a lot of trust and there's not a lot of honor in things. But in Japanese culture, there's a huge amount of honor, and most contracts are done with a hand, you know, the handshake. So I'm wondering if it's all part of that as well, and that this new way of contracting will grow more if it can grow alongside a kind of bigger social, cultural change. But I think, yeah, so I really like what you said.
Wow.
I was going to say, when I first mooted the idea of a 500-word construction contract, one of the chairman of one of the big publishers who obviously make a lot of money out of selling their contracts, said that it didn't refer to me, but said, oh, there are some people who are advocating a single page contract. He said, that might have been fine in the good old days when we had trust, but it's not fine anymore. And it was like, whoa, hang on, this is a chicken and egg. Which comes first, trust and a really simple contract, or a simple contract and then trust? And it's like, do you know what? I think in the industry, the sector that I'm in, the adversarial culture has taken 150 years to build, but it's quite ingrained because lots of governments have tried to change it. And I thought, I may not be able to change the culture of construction, but I can change the idea that you could use a contract only for, you know, gaming the relationship, or, you know, trying to get one over, or taking something of value and not paying for it, that kind of feel that contracts have. And I could just say, maybe if we made it really simple, then you can see there's no loopholes, there's no nasties, there's no gaming the contract. It's just so open and transparent that actually you now have to do the hard work to create the culture that you want, because this is basically a neutral framework into which you can add a bit more of yourself and all that kind of stuff. So that when he said that, I thought, oh, wow, you're telling me that we need really complex contracts because we don't have trust. Actually, let's have trust first and then build contracts that suit that, rather than the other way around.
But trust is the most complex concept to build first. Yes, sorry, Patrick, go ahead.
I just wanted to chip into there because there was something that was occurring to me that what I've seen, if we sort of look deeper at what's happening in society, is that and I love that word of sort of reference to honour. I think connected to that is that what we have is a society where basically everyone is refusing to take responsibility for anything. And so that old saying that no one was ever fired for buying IBM. So that was this old thing that, and likewise, you know, no one was ever fired for going to a big law firm and saying, give me your best contract, and I don't care how much it costs, but at least I've done my job as a responsible procurement or head of marketing or whatever. And, you know, it's ingrained, of course, in our sort of feudal corporate structures where the owners have no responsibility, just as slave owners didn't have any responsibility for the slaves, right? So it's the same sort of thinking, really, that and you know, go back hundreds of years, well, the landlords would have the high life in London, and then the foremen, so the equivalent of the boards of the companies, they have responsibility, they have to deal with the mess, but you know, you don't touch the people living the high life and collecting money from their estates. And what I'm seeing is that cascades down throughout organizations where no one is willing to step up and say, I'm taking responsibility here. So nobody. And so climate change is just lots and lots of individuals saying, well, I can't because the regulators, I can't because the lawyers, I can't because my boss, I can't because the shareholders, I can't because of the public, the customers. And so if we all just said, and so, yeah, the contract is just one manifestation of that, where you say, well, I'll just, you know, and the lawyers themselves, they could come up with a 500-word contract, but that would take responsibility and they might be sued potentially because they're going against market practice. So even if they don't believe in it themselves and they've seen some of the stuff we've seen, which they must have done, many of them, they don't feel they can because no one else has given them permission to do it, and they're not willing to give themselves permission. And maybe that's why some of us have to leave formal practice, because we think it's so toxic to be in that system. So I think that taking on responsibility, I'm clearer and clearer that I'm seeing it all over the place, that, you know, people who pretend to be adults are actually being adolescents. We have an adolescent society is a deeper thing of that, where you think, oh, it's all for me and I can take what I want and there's no payback ever. You know, somebody else will pay back, which is what's happening.
Well, you know, honor, trust, responsibility, these are the themes coming out from what you all are saying. And if we are taking an embodied approach to contracting, you have just begun here articulating what we, in the new normal, the embodiment that we should be striving for in society, that honor, that trust, and that responsibility for the obligations that we take on. To me, this is transformational. And I don't know if any of you were in the Jeremy Lent session yesterday, where he was leading us through the 3 horizon model, which you may or may not be familiar with. And what we are trying to do at Future Law is to plot the legal system change intervention points over these 5 days, coming out from these discussions, plot the legal system change intervention points on the Horizon 1, Horizon 2, and Horizon 3 model. And the Horizon 1 would be any interventions that are basically fixing things that are wrong in the system. Horizon 2 would be anything that's disrupting the system, but it's disrupting the system, but it doesn't fundamentally change the system. You're doing something in a better way. You know, the Tesla electric vehicles, right? And Horizon 1 would be Chevron, a case against Chevron for oil spills and winning that outspin. Horizon 3 would be the most transformational changes that we could plot and then work toward, and then create some sort of roadmap for how we get there. And, you know, from this discussion, like prior to this discussion, I would have placed conscious contracting perhaps in Horizon 2, right? But when I think about it after this discourse with you guys, I feel this is Horizon 3. This is a whole transformational shift. If we were to create the world, and if this could happen in the world, truly, in a way that everyone is operating in this way, this is Horizon 3 stuff. And the question, yeah, but although one horizon is not better than the other, because all horizons have to be done at the same time right now, because we have to be fixing the crap that's happening in the world. So we need people doing that. We need people in every horizon. So I see a comment coming in. Sorry, Savia, I have been so engrossed. Right, might this be an on-ramp from Horizon 2 to Horizon 3? You were there before, Savia, with Jeremy. Can you jump in with your comments there, because and share your ideas on this, because yeah, this is what I'm seeing. This is powerful stuff, guys. Sorry to be such a fan. Savia, are you around?
I am around. Sorry, I've been sitting quietly listening. Thank you. It's been very fascinating. I'm wondering whether what you've been speaking about, and this idea of contracting in the way that's been discussed, is what I was listening to yesterday. Is like a bridge, I would call it, but in the Horizon model lingo, it was called an on-ramp. So it's a way to move from Horizon 2, the disruption thing, into something that's much more, in a way, profound. And for me, it's like a leapfrog, sort of a big leap. It's not another little step. But the difference is that somehow, because contracts are familiar, the concept of is familiar, it like makes it possible for people to engage with this idea of, well, we need contracts, so maybe we need this kind of, I don't know, I'm not expressing it very well, but I'm just wondering about whether in fact this discussion is one of these things of how do we sneak from Horizon 2 to Horizon 3 without upsetting anybody too much. Not because you don't want to upset people, but because you want to kind of get them to be in the world that's, you know, experiencing a different world before they go, oh, I'm in this other world, what now? So that's really, that was really my thought. As you said, is it already, I just thought it has potential. And maybe for me, just to say, one of the things I had to go away for some minutes, and then I had to go away again for a few minutes, but I'm very interested in the whole issue of advanced directives, which I don't know if that's a global thing or just a South African thing. Well, I suppose you call them living wills, but this is with medical proxy. And I'm very interested in that because it's something that takes you, it's ordinary people stuff. You don't have to be in commerce or whatever, you know, it's like everyone will die. So, and this is guaranteed kind of thing. So I'm very intrigued about, I mean, I've been interested in wills, but you can still just not have a will, and that's, you know, and that's also how that is. But So I've been very interested, and I mean, listening to your discussions, thinking how would all of this play itself out in transforming the patient medical profession relationship, like through using a contracting style that you've been talking about, because you know that relationship is not one of which it doesn't start usually on, even with palliative care. I mean, palliative care is a bit better, but so that's where I'm exploring. So that's why I'm listening to all of this and thinking, how would we use it there, besides also some other things. But I mean, Margaret Rose, I hope that sort of answers. I thought, is this actually one of these segues or on-ramps or, you know, paths that takes one from one horizon to the other, possibly?
I see Patrick wants to answer, but I did want to bring in Rhiannon on the issue of living wills that Severe raised. Yes, I'm moderator, so I should know the right thing to do here, right? So
you really should, Margaret Rose. What are you doing?
I know.
Where's my contract that I signed?
I'm a lawyer. I'm just learning this moderating thing. But so is it burning and hot, and you have to go to respond to Severe, and then we bring Rhiannon in with the wills? Yeah, Patrick, you go.
And it's relatively short for me. I suppose it was really just to say I think I agree with Severe. I think I don't see it as an end point particularly. I think, you know, Horizon 4, maybe we just don't have any contracts at all. But I think I think there's a role for contracts for each horizon. One, to help old ways of things die in a graceful manner. I do think that the way you do, you know, conscious contracts depends so much on who are the parties and their level of consciousness, if you like. And I can see, as I said, I can see a role in all levels. And I think contracts, in a way, we can just see as a sort of a bridge, a facilitation method to help parties, you know, people engage, and how they do that is, I am not sure the horizon. I do know the 3 horizon model. I'm not sure that's so useful for thinking about contracts particularly. But as for the living will, so I thought I agree with that. As for the living wills, I will hand over to lovely Rhiannon, because
but in a second, because I would press a little bit back on you on that issue, because I actually see it as both. I think, yes, we can contract in each of the horizons, but there is an outcome in terms of embodiment that we are actually progressing here. And if more and more people started to contract in this way, which is a new form of embodiment, then we have created a transformational shift on the planet, not just a disruption, not just fixing something that's gone bad. So I think it's both.
And maybe there's work to do to describe what that looks like actually, because any label, conscious contract or whatever, doesn't quite do it. There is a process.
It's a process.
That we're between us articulating that isn't written down anywhere that I've seen, that is about that. How do you engage consciously in human relationships, of which the contracts are part?
Sounds like relational contracting. Before Severe,
may I just add to that? You see, I think that this style of contracting may well create a different way of relating once the contracting has, let's say, because it's, so I think that sort of feels, it is like a chicken and egg. It's like you've got to start somewhere with, I'll use an example that I'm aware of, and I don't know whose company name this is, but it just struck me some years ago. I came across someone who'd started all-weather agreements, which I really loved as a name of their, you know, all-weather agreements. Sort of, you know, agreements that can take you through all weathers. So this notion, which I really liked, because it took you away from the idea of you need an agreement for stormy weather only, and when the good weather's good, you don't need an agreement or a contract. So I just thought it was very clever, and I hope they're still in business, and I have no idea. But yeah, so I think that I do have a sense that when people have gone through a process of contracting where they've had to smell, touch, taste, be in each other's presence, as opposed to outsourcing it to some lawyer bunch who can, you know, do all that adversarial stuff. And I don't, you know, that whole disembodied thing. I do think that you would probably find that there's a good chance that people would relate differently because they would have had an experience. It is possible to get through this in a different way, and there is a possibility. So I think there would be some kind of interpersonal behavioral change at a fairly large scale if this was happening at a large scale. And what that might lead to, who knows? Certainly, I don't know if, you know, I mean, some of those of you who lawyers here would know better than me, is this going to put you into penury and you'll have to find a new thing to do, because everyone will say, we don't need lawyers anymore. I doubt it, because I don't think it's that simple. But that's just my comment, is that I do think that the way that we would conduct ourselves under conflict or dispute may well change as a result, or even what we perceive as being conflict and dispute might even vary. Absolutely. That people would, you know, that there would be more tolerance. I mean, in business, there's that thing of the envelope of variation. There'd be more tolerance for ebb and flow, and for people don't all have to agree with me, and it's not a crisis, and I must immediately get divorced if and whatever. That there would maybe be a greater flexibility, and maybe that word tolerance, but more flexibility of the variations, and also variations in perception and preference and things like that. So yeah, I think there would be a difference. Exactly how it might look, you know, let's hope we all live to see that.
Thanks, Sophia. I do want to thank you. I do want to bring Rhiannon in now to, please.
Hi. Well, I'm mindful of our time, and we kind of have run over, haven't we?
No, we haven't.
4:15 or 4:15.
Oh, we still go, great. Okay, because I was going to say I'll happily chat to Svea separately. So 2 comments on that. The first one, I think, you know, are lawyers going to be defunct? And I don't think so. I just think some lawyers are going to be defunct, but like the dinosaurs, the dinosaur lawyers, because there's this lovely quote from a chief justice or some high up powerful lawyer, judge person, in America who sort of talked about the role of lawyers. And I think he said, you know, the role of doctors is to heal the body, the physical body. And traditionally, this was the role of doctors, and the role of the church or the clergy was to heal the spiritual body. And the role of lawyers was to heal the social fabric. So for me, that's what I think we're heading back to, is lawyers as healers, and lawyers as healers of the social fabric, the very stuff that forest floor, actually, that the stuff that really binds us together. And that's how I see my role. And as far as the living wills and advanced, so they are called advanced directives here in the UK, and I thank you. Thanks, Patrick. Warren Berger, Chief Justice, yeah, very wise. I think the conscious contract, so yes, I do use a process for those where people are willing to engage. So it's very interesting. Many people will say, yes, I would like an advanced directive, I would like a living will. Tell me a bit about it. So I tell them about it, and they say, yes, I want one of those. So that's the very simple thing, and I work through it and explain what it says. But then there are others who've never really thought about this concept, or as you said, have received a diagnosis where they know that there is a time coming quite soon when they might not die, but actually when they will die. And as you said, you know, it's the guaranteed thing, but people live with this idea that it's never going to happen to them. But these people have been told it is going to happen, and it's going to happen quite soon, and you need to prepare for that. And with those people, I find that a process works really well. So, and that work I definitely do collaboratively with a social worker or a death doula or somebody who can really hold that space. And so we use tools as well. So one of the tools that Rhiannon van der Croft, who is the death doula and end-of-life educationist here in the UK who I've worked with, one of the tools that she uses is she tells a story about a woman named Sarah. And she has a suitcase that belongs to Sarah. It's full of Sarah's things, and it has Sarah's shoes, and it has Sarah's photos, and it has some little knickknacks from her family. And it's this whole story about this woman who receives a terminal diagnosis. And it's so powerful because then the person can talk about Sarah instead of talking about themselves. And slowly, through talking about Sarah, they start to talk about themselves in that position. So that's a really wonderful tool. And it gives me goosebumps just talking about it, because to see her do it is so incredible. And then the other thing she works with a lot is cards. So you can, you get those lovely sets of cards which say all the different things that might be important to you at the end of life. Like, I want to be at home, or I want soft music playing. And you put all those cards out, and similar to the values exercises that I do with people, you rate those according to what is most important to you. And so she helps people to come up with that. And then we can develop a living will that is really, really just for that person, very personal, and says a lot more. Interestingly, in the UK, the advance directive is recognized as law, so it has to be followed. And there's a thing that can go alongside that called an advance statement, which is more about the thing like, I would like nice soft music playing. So we don't have that distinction in South Africa, and living wills are not legally recognized. They are followed out of the sort of, because on a moral basis more than a legal basis. So there's a lot of work to be done in South Africa. If you want, I'm keen to do that work and get it made law and all that stuff. But I think that's the difference, is that the process becomes, again, the thing that's so important, rather than just, this is a living will, sign it, and we'll try and make sure you're as comfortable as possible if you can't speak for yourself.
Thanks, Rhiannon.
Yeah.
Sophia, did you have one final comment, because we're coming to the end?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
No, I wanted to say thank you. Just a quick comment is the public sector hospitals that I've worked in, many doctors, not just one, have been deeply and profoundly relieved when an advance directive is offered, because they've immediately said, now I know what the patient wants, and I can manage the family and all these other pressures better because the patient has spoken. So that's really interesting. And the other thing, just quick comment is that I coordinate our local death cafe, and we did a very interesting thing at request of some of the members, which was, could we sit together and have everyone do their own advance directive, just working collectively, quietly, and just going along the process, and then occasionally stopping to have cups of tea and cake or coffee, and people talking to one another about what does this mean. And it was extraordinary. Within 2 hours, I think it was like 9 people had done their advance directives, deeply happy with them. So I think that there's some interesting, simple, community kind of based ways of doing these things as well. And it was really fascinating to see the wording that people started using, very different from the kind of wording that I would usually see turning up. So thank you very much for this discussion.
Okay, I would like to
share a website, sorry, just quickly on the chat, mydecisions.org.uk, where you can work through a whole lot of options to create your own advance directive. I like that website very much.
Okay, so guys, in closing, I would like each of you all to share your final comments, and I would like you to speak to lawyers around the world who may hear your discussion, have heard what you're saying, and who are thinking, okay, well, where do I start in this? How do I learn from you? How do I get to understand more? That, and then if people who are potential clients are like, well, how do I get involved in this? How do I hire you? And all of that. Could you share just a little bit about what you think the first steps are if people want to engage with this new style of contracting? Sarah, would you like to go first? Because
yeah, sure. So I think the important thing to remember is a contract is meant to be a tool to help. a person or an individual and a corporate or vice versa to actually facilitate some transaction or project. It's a tool, so it can be any form of tool that suits that transaction and those parties. It doesn't have to, you know, be written in vellum and however many words per inch and all that kind of stuff. It should fundamentally be a tool that we're happy with, that we're comfortable with, that we know is good for the job. And actually, the purpose of the contract really should be to record what the parties have already done. So if they haven't got to the point of knowing really what sort of the nuances are, what the things that they need someone to help them on that process. And you can get an independent person, a consultant in to do it. You can do it yourself if you've got that sort of relationship. But lawyers need to stop thinking they've got the answer and start to think about how they can actually help their clients to meet strategically important decisions in a way that makes them happy, so that that tool becomes a tool for celebration rather than, you know, something you chuck behind you and go, well, that's all done and dust with, let's get on with it. Because I think it's got to the point where we've ended up allowing the law to dictate how businesses should work, and that's the wrong way around. We've got the tail very much wagging the dog, and that's really not how contracts should be working between humans who trust each other, who want to do something together collaboratively and in trust.
Thank you, Sarah. And people can find you at 500words.co.uk. Yeah. Patrick, do you want to go next?
Happy to. Yeah, I like what Sarah said. I suppose for me, we've talked in this call about honour, trust and responsibility, and how a fragmented world means that those qualities are being diluted and lost, and no one quite, people trust them, think they're trustworthy, but generally think most other people aren't trustworthy. So that's a funny state of affairs. And I suppose it's always hard to take the first step when you're in a system where you think that that other people rely on you and that are looking to you to, or you look to others to think, well, how should I act? But these things about trust, responsibility and honour, they start with ourselves. And that if the lawyers can show up as being trustworthy and trusting and honourable and responsible, then you're sort of more likely to attract the sort of clients who want that and who want that sort of lawyer. And so it's sort of lawyers as leaders as well in this, which is not generally that we seem to be encouraged to play that role. I mean, that's not one we're used to doing, but I think that's what's needed in these times. So I think somebody said the quality of an intervention depends mainly on the quality of the intervener. So if we want to serve our clients and serve society as our practice as lawyers, then we need a deep inquiry inside. What does that mean? How do we show up? Are we happy with the status quo and our role and our contribution to it?
Thanks, Rhiannon.
So I like what Sarah said, and I like what Patrick said, and I don't have much to add except to say to lawyers, my message is there is another way, and if you haven't found that way yet, collaborate and find people and look for other ways, because they are out there, and also trust yourself and trust your heart and have courage. And what I'd like to say to clients is that you are the expert in your relationship. People wanting contracts, you know what your relationship, what you want for that relationship and how you want it to go. And so you need to look for a lawyer who sees you as the expert and not themselves as the expert. And you want a lawyer who will co-create with you. I think Patrick was using that word, and who will guide you to put your relation, to guide you with what the law says around the type of relationship that you want to have. But when it comes to the nuts and bolts of the relationship, allows you as the expert to say what it is that's needed.
Thank you. Thank you, Rhiannon, Sarah, and Patrick, for this really enriching discussion. Wow. if we can have a world where honor, trust, responsibility, and co-creativity is what we embody, each of us, and we bring that to the table, I mean, that's well worth the effort that we are all putting in trying to create the new normal.